Welcome to Culture Commerce Wine, where we explore how wine brands stay relevant as culture shifts, markets evolve, and trust is constantly being renegotiated. For our very first episode, I couldn't imagine a better guest, Charl Bassil. Charl has built a career shaping some of the world's most recognizable brands. He's worked at Procter Gamble, SABMiller, Pernod Ricard, and most recently, he led global marketing at Absolut. Today, he's the very first chief brand officer at the BBC, guiding a century-old institution into a digital future. Across all of these roles, Charl has been driven by a simple but powerful question. How can brands help people feel like they belong? Charl, welcome. It's such a pleasure having you join me today.
Thank you very much, Polly. It's really nice to be here, and I really appreciate you reaching out to me.
Oh, and you are good on podcasts. I've always said, people who've hosted podcasts themselves make the best guests. So I'm excited.
That means that you should be a guest on somebody's podcast very soon.
Oh, golly. Yes, I certainly do that. It's weird to be on the other side of the mic, though, quite honestly. So I saw you speak at South by Southwest. But I'm going to stop by asking a very personal question. What kind of puppy do you have? I hear somebody barking.
You can hear him in the background.
But that's okay.
He always barks when I'm online. It's almost kind of he wants the world to know that he's here.
Yeah.
And he's a 5.5-year-old puppy. His name is Coca-Cola, so affectionately Cola.
Okay.
And he's a little black dwarf poodle, they call them, and sort of our other child, basically.
I love that. I have Steve. Steve is well known in the wine world. Steve is a 5-year-old miniature Dachshund who came home the day that Barcelona locked down. And then I proceeded to record podcasts for every single day of like the first 8 weeks of his life. So he knows that when I say goodbye, that's the moment he gets to come in, and I say goodbye and he is at that door. So so doggies are always welcome.
Pavlov, right? I mean, it's so interesting. Actually, Cola's also a lockdown puppy. Oh. So I think there's sort of a generation of dogs in people's homes.
Now, you do hear that there's a generation of children going off to school, that they were the lockdown kids, and that's supposed to be very interesting for teachers. Yeah. So I saw you at South by Southwest, and what really struck me is that at South by Southwest, we have a lot of talk about the shiny new toys, what's next and what's all the technology we need to adopt and where is AI taking us. And when you spoke, I felt like that you were speaking in a very approachable way about tried and true frameworks, about how we grow brands, about first principles of marketing. And I really think that, that is a heart of our business that we need to get back to. And it's something that my industry, the wine industry, really needs to hear because they are relatively nascent when it comes to digital adoption. They lived in a very cloistered world, that was controlled by distribution for so long. And now they're having to learn to meet their customers where they are. And so it was for that reason that I reached out to you, that you could come and share with us sort of your background going from the alcohol industry into an organization that has a profound public remit or mandate. Yeah. So I guess start with that. Like, what was that like? Had you been trained in the alcohol industry in such a way that it was a big culture shock for you going into the BBC?
I mean, it's a question I asked myself when the opportunity came about, because I wasn't sure. I think there's a lot of doubt that you sometimes have when you've grown up in one place, whether it's an industry or a geography or a culture, and you sort of transplant yourself into something else. And I was talking to somebody, a friend of mine, a colleague, Nancy, who's in the wine industry, just last week, about this, because her question was exactly the same as yours. And the truth is, we often think that our skills are specific to the environment that we're in because we were taught by mentors, or that we were taught the tools of the trade, the tried and tested ways of doing things. But at the very core of everybody in the world of marketing acquisition is a fundamental truth, which is we're reaching out to human beings who are emotions before rational and before purchase choice. We're reaching out to human beings. We're trying to influence culture, whether you're in the wine industry, the spirits industry, or indeed, the home of culture, entertainment, and media. And you're trying to influence people to choose you over the others that are all equally good. And that's the hard part, whether you're making great wine or you're making great vodka or beer or great television and content. There's a lot to choose from. So it's not as unique as a new app like Uber when it came out. I mean, there's lots of hailing services now, but so those sort of product tech heavy industries where something pops up and it's apparently changing the world or transforming the world. It's really what it's doing is just removing a barrier or a pain point. Yeah, our job is the same. It's just constantly thinking about what our audiences, our consumers, our customers need. So I think the thing that surprised me was how much overlap there is in terms of intent, and in terms of the skills that we've been taught. I mean, there's a lot to learn, obviously, so I don't want to make it sound like it's an easy transfer, but people are willing to share, and if you're open and willing to learn, that combination of that, almost I would call almost that, I've heard this term before, this naive intelligence. You're coming into a place where you're curious, you're asking questions. It opens up something in your brain, and then you bring in the things that have helped you to kind of win with customers or with consumers, and you bring those two things together. I mean, it can be quite a potent combination. Because it's something that you've learned elsewhere, and you're applying it in a space where people are much more knowledgeable. You bring those two things together. I think it's a good. I'll borrow a term from my time in spirits. It's a great cocktail.
It's a great cocktail.
It's a great cocktail.
And you bring the creativity. I do feel like spirits has such a wealth of creativity because, of course, we're always pushing up against social license and regulation, and so it's maybe not as easy to be in front of someone as it is if you were selling tires.
I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's two things. It's kind of your distribution of the product, which is a challenge, by the way, also in media. As it is in the world of alcohol, and then it's actually reaching your audience in the places where they are. And by the way, even for media, traditional sort of broadcast public service organizations, younger audiences are somewhere else. They're not immediately in the places that you are. So you're going to have to go and find them, convince them.
Tell me more. And how do you do that? Where are they? How do we get to them?
I mean, they're everywhere. They're everywhere they used to be, and they're in places that we sort of expect them to be. They're in YouTube, they're in games, they're in private chat groups on WhatsApp. They're connecting with one another in ways that's evolving. And you hear this a lot. So it's not sort of a new discovery or new learning, but it's an acknowledgement of that. I think that's really important, which is what's more important than being tech savvy or being taken up. You said it earlier on about the South by Southwest talk. It's like I'm intrigued by technology as a means to deliver against human need. Technology is what opens the door for us to do things more efficiently, but it doesn't take away the sort of human need. It doesn't change the fundamental nature of how humans are. We are creatures that want to connect. We are creatures that enjoy emotional engagement and So how do we do that where they are, rather than get swept away by kind of the panic of AI and social media and so forth? It's more it's more slow and steady, and adopt the things that help you to connect, rather than sort of pushing aside the human connection. And that's why, the wine industry, when you open up your industry, is a beautiful place for people to connect. It's an important place for people to connect. It's a healthy place, normally over a meal. Let's not forget those places and those things, but there's an efficient way to get to scale through technology. And that's equally important for businesses. Is like, how do you get to scale without losing the essence of what you do? And that's, I think that's why, people like you and I and others are attracted to the game we're in, because it's a balancing act of the very human connection, but driving a business at scale in an efficient way without losing that. So,
and it does really allow you to, explore diversity of opportunities in a way that, like, I love technology, and I'm 50 years old. Like I'm in exactly the category of people that sort of grew up watching technology explode and
Yeah.
Star Wars became reality,
I'm on
right?
Gen X.
Yeah, Gen X. And I've worked with technology for so long, but also I love creativity. I love words and humor. And literally, it does just come down to, I say this all the time, that as marketers, we are the customer advocate in the room. Like we're the person who sits there representing these broad strokes of different needs, different interests. I want to go back to something though
Yeah.
that I thought was really interesting. So, you are charged with taking BBC into basically digital first era. Is that correct?
I think I'd sort of be an overstatement if said I was the person who's taking the BBC into
Okay.
digital first. I would say there's a whole group of us in the sort of senior exec group who are charged with that. My remit is within the world of building the brand and connecting with younger audiences in terms of bringing them into that world. My partners in the content and editorial side are developing the content that resonates with audiences. And we're a public service, so we need to resonate universally, which is, I think, quite a sort of a unique challenge, because most brands, you're able to choose your target audience and sort of go after them and polarize other audiences as a way to be quite specific. In public service, with a brand like the BBC, we need to be sure that we're adding value to all audiences in the UK. And so, I'd be working very closely with my editorial colleagues, because the brand, the product is the same thing, which is it's the shows that we produce, it's the content we create, it's the documentaries, and then sort of the wrapper around that is the brand of the platform, which is the BBC, which is evolving. And so I have colleagues in the product team who are thinking about the way that they remove the distribution blockages, the accessibility challenges that audiences might have. Because essentially, we were a broadcaster once. We were a radio broadcaster 100 years ago. We invented radio broadcasting. We invented the sort of radio that you sort of give to people to listen. We democratized music and live sports, and we democratized the voice of the king. The King's Voice, the movie. And so when you think about that radical technology 100 years ago, this box that you could bring into your home and hear the voices of people, that's still the truth today, except there's other players who might be innovating the hardware ahead of us. So the streaming services, cell phones. So what we as a business and as a brand think about is, well, how do we ensure that audiences have the easiest access to all of this content, to be informed, to be educated, to be entertained? And so when you say, I've been charged with the remit, there's a generation of leaders at the BBC who, come from big corporates who've taken, we've made a choice to be in public service for a while, because we really believe that public service at its very heart is such an important thing right now, in a world that's more and more polarized, where freedom of speech is being challenged, where press freedom is under threat. And so you've got this collective effort of editorial teams, product teams, the brand teams, who are working together to most effectively distribute content that's of value in a way that's accessible to all audiences in the places that they are, which happens to be in digital streaming services right now. So whether it's, we've got a part of our business which is BBC Sounds, that's our radio and our podcasts and our music services. We've got iPlayer, which is the sort of television and movies and film. And, between those two, we cover, all of our entertainment needs. But we've also got Bite Size, which is education online for young students. We have CBBS, which is for younger audiences. So like my daughter, who's 2.5, it's the only place that I really trust. There's great content on YouTube. There's great stuff on Netflix. So there's really great media companies out there. But we spend this inordinate amount of time and effort in curating that content so that it's appropriate. So I feel safe putting my 2.5-year-old.
It's trustworthy. I think that that's such an important part of it.
So exactly. So our Director General, Tim Davey, who sort of convinced me to come over, he's really been sort of saying the same thing over and over. He's saying we have to be the digital first global public service And I think if we have that as our remit, then yes, I'm one of the people whose job it is to ensure that we're connecting with audiences in the digital space.
That you're on target. So I suppose when we think about that, and we think about that heritage, and we think about 100 years of effectively evolution, right? There is, you do have what I would describe as legacy brands that are important. And you also have this push to, I'm going to assume, develop not only new channels, but new content, new direction. How do you figure out how to balance the caring for what has always been with driving new growth? And then even in that context, I mean, there are budgets involved, right?
Absolutely.
How do you divide where the money goes toward caring for what has always been versus putting the money into developing the things that attract those new audiences?
So, I mean, that's a live conversation. So I think it's a brilliant question. Cola agrees. One of the tools that I have brought in from the FMCG world has been something called brand power. And brand power, it's not rocket science. It's science, and it's been around for a while. And credit to Kantar, who have been almost at the vanguard of building that. This idea that brands are salient, they're relevant, and they're distinctive. And if you measure those things over time, you can see which of your brands by target audience. So you can start slicing by audience segment, by geography. You can determine which of your show brands, which of your service brands, and even sort of your master brand, kind of, is it resonating? Are they resonating? Are they salient? Are we do people know about them? Are we doing the right marketing stuff? Do they have relevance and distinctiveness? In other words, is the editorial appropriate? And is the actual product, the content itself, and is the discoverability there with our product and our platform services? So that's one of the sort of key tools that I think will help us to determine that. The second one is, I mean, you've heard of demand space mapping. You're really just looking at audience segmentation and then mapping that against audience needs. The BBC is such a treasure trove of information and data. I mean, I've never worked for an organization with as much data. And that's a blessing and a curse. Luckily, I work with some brilliant people in what we call our audiences team who are able to make sense of that. And working with them, we're putting together this demand space mapping tool, which will allow us to cluster the stuff that we do versus the opportunity space, and determine kind of with our brand power work, how strong we are or how weak we are. So, and that portfolio thinking will help those arbitration decisions. And I was in a conversation this morning where part of the tension is servicing audiences that are paying their license fees and who have been with the BBC for a long time, while attracting audiences who might not see us as relevant because they haven't really engaged with the brand. And, they've just sort of gone directly to YouTube or to Netflix. And sort of to remind them that we've got a lot on that's very relevant and very appropriate for them, from live sport to news to entertainment to more. And kind of, and they're an expensive bunch to go after because they're fragmented, as we said earlier on. And that balancing act of doing what's right for those that are loyal to you while bringing in new audiences so that you can win in the moment, but you can also ensure that there's sustainable growth, and you have, there's an existential question.
Yeah.
Who are we in 10 years' time? Who are we in 20 years' time?
And so I use a framework. It's funny, we use the Kantar framework. Like, I love that framework, and it's a good visual. It's one of those things that I think a brand doesn't need me or you in the room to sit down and read about that particular framework and understand how they can start to brainstorm that. But of course, the big question that we deal with all the time, even when you get into something like personas, very simply, well, are we talking to the people we have now, or are we talking to the people we want to have? And we use a framework that is, you've got your primary consumers. Those are the people who right now are paying you money. You love them. You need to keep them. This is like old lang syne, but for brands, right? And then you've got what, it is expressed as the relevant others. And those are the people who have the potential, for a variety of different reasons, to grow into brand awareness. And what we're really noticing is that if we're not talking to what I'm going to describe as younger audiences or new audiences, but if we're not talking to them in a way that respects them as a relevant other, they're going to turn off, and it's going to be a lot harder to get them back 10 years from now when they've maybe felt like they didn't belong, we weren't interested in them, we're fuddy-duddies, whatever, than if we can just sort of gently trickle out. But that is a budget play. That's a really long-term budget play. And I know that you, I love this. This is so, South African by descent. You call yourself a brand farmer.
Yes.
And that has a real sense of the long term, as opposed to, hunting, which is going out there for the short term. How does, when you're looking at prioritizing what needs to happen now, this is such an issue in wine, what needs to happen now? Oh my God, we're in crisis. How do we deal with panic? Versus these are the things that we're going to put in place so that we know we are resilient in 5, 7, 10, 100 years time.
That's such a difficult one because it's the truth. What you've just articulated.
It's the big mess that we all live in, right?
It's a mess if you allow yourself to get drawn into the noise. I think it's just very noisy. It's very noisy, and there's a lot of people who want to be heard. You and I are amongst those people. So it's not sort of me separating myself from that milieu, but I got really good advice. And besides the hunter-farmer analogy, which that was advice given to me by a CEO of South African breweries, Norman Adamy. He looked at me and, he's sort of very typical style of his. He had a cigarette in his hand back in the day when, it wasn't taboo. But he kind of looked at me and he said, farmers nurture the soil, they nurture the seeds, they nurture, and over time they can actually feed the community for a long time. And hunters, get out there and kill the animal, they can only feed the family for a week. Yeah. So this nurturing nature, which attracts a lot of people to marketing, is up against sort of almost a zeitgeist of machismo and hunter mentality, which is I want it for me and I want it now and I only want to feed myself. So it's a cultural reality that we're facing that goes beyond marketing and our business. And I think it's sort of having a little bit of resolve and a bit of reflecting on kind of what kind of planet and society that we want to create. And we want to create something that's for the community, or we want to create something that's just for me. It's sort of one of those profound philosophical
these are deep
realities.
Thoughts on this podcast.
So we're building brands that are about community. We're building brands that are about bringing people together, whether it's wine or beer or spirits or indeed the BBC, where it is about building community and it's about people sharing moments and sharing conversations about the show that they watched last night, or gathering around the live sports event, or having a glass of wine in their hand over dinner. We are the people who are interested in nurturing, and so that's really important. And then sort of the bigger question of kind of building for the future and the building for the now. I think when you have that in mind, you're able to then go, okay, well, what do I need to do now to stay afloat? Because it's all lofty to say we're building for the future and we can just forget who we have.
Got to pay the bills.
Got to pay the bills, when you're in publicly listed organizations, the observation I have is you've got the sort of annual targets that then get broken down into quarters. And so, as one of my colleagues at Pernod Ricard said, it's quarteritis. You have this kind of short term, we've got to fix the problem now, and then so if you're able to, if you have the resources, get the people, the short term commercial folks to do that. They are necessary. We're not sort of undermining that. That's an important thing. You got to keep the thing going, but then get the people to have the longer term view, which is build a bigger ship for us for the future, alongside the rafts that are going out.
So you think that's different people?
I think if you're really capable, and you have the ability to kind of separate those two things in your own mind, then do that. Spend some time focusing on the now, and then spend some time focusing on the future. And good CEOs have to do that, right? Good leaders of businesses. If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to have to do it on your own. But if you have the opportunity to work with different cycles, the short-term cycle and the long-term cycle, then it simply becomes an arbitration between those two. How much can I invest in the future? How much do I have to invest in the short term? It's like personal finances. I'm not really good at this, to be honest, because in my personal life, I want the hit now. I want to take the family and go do, but actually, we all know that for the long term, we should be investing in, and it's true for business. It's just a reality of business.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because one of the things that we found is that trying to get clearly articulated goals, oftentimes from like our key stakeholders, it can be challenging, especially in something that does feel, very much grounded in agriculture, and it's about quality and it's about fineness, because the goals often have no connection to financial sustainability at all, and there's almost perceived as a crassness. In wine, marketers are like their very least favorite people on the planet, because if you have to have a marketer, then apparently your wine isn't so good that it just sells itself. There's the old joke about that. And so really trying to get, whether it's within a brief or within regular conversations, getting the stakeholders to define, okay, well, what does that look like? And to be transparent with the teams, which of course you got because of the whole mechanism. I mean, it is entirely transparent, which is amazing to me, working in an industry that's like not at all. So how do you work with, or how in the past have you worked with your leadership and then the people who work for you to articulate, this is what we need to accomplish, this is why, this is the short term, and this is the long term?
I've used this analogy within my organization, because sort of introducing the idea of brand is not an anathema, and neither is it something absolutely new. People know what it is, but sort of introducing it as a key business tool is really interesting. And I use the analogy of the beautiful mansion. It's an asset. Property is an asset, and an asset in its own right is only valuable if you sell it, unless you can create an annuity, which is rental, in the case of the property. If your property starts to degrade over time, that rental that you can achieve is going to get smaller, and it's going to get more desperate. But if you keep investing some of your rental back into the property and then build it up and then maybe build another property, you're building the asset value, but you're also raising your annuity. So, in business, the brand is your asset. And the annuity is either your sales or the willingness to pay, or subscription fee, or your license fee in our case. So there is a virtuous circle of investment in the long term, which is the brand, that delivers an easier return on your investment in the short term. But you're only going to see that in a short while. So I smiled when you said the marketing is a bad word in wine. It's like marketing can have a bad name if you think about marketing as trying to sell something that's bad. But if you think of marketing as part of brand building, it's only one component of brand building. And you take a step back and you say, actually, our job is building brands. And actually, building brands is not just the job of marketing. Marketing is one way to build brands. Actually, investing in the product, innovation, distribution. I mean, all the P's that Michael Porter has put out there. These are important parts of building the brand. And actually, we're brand custodians. You need somebody to be able to look at that dispassionately from everything else and say, well, are we investing? Is that house on the hill? Are we investing in it properly? So that we can, in the long term, ensure our continued annuity, our continued sales. So same thing for wine brands is, are we thinking about the brand in its entirety? Does it have the physical experience that people are gravitating to? Can we take that physical experience and export it to airports around the world? These are small little things, but they're big things that help build the brand, and they go beyond marketing, because tasting the product is, you wouldn't think that's marketing. That's the product selling itself. Absolutely. But actually, you need someone to think about, how do you package that experience? How do you take that experience online so that people can register? It's ensuring that journey is a cohesive one and all speaks to the same thing. So that's the world that we're in, you and I. That's the world that the BBC is thinking about, which is, how do we make sure that our audience has an experience that is a positive one, that brings them back, that ensures value for them? That's our role as a public service. And then existentially, how do we make sure that they're aware that it's coming from the BBC?
Yeah.
so that in the future they're willing to pay their license fee, because that's the connection. And the same thing when you're selling, whether it's vodka or wine or beer, do we have the product that's quality, premium? Is it packaged in a way that's appealing? Is it presented in an environment? This is all part of the brand experience. And so when you bring that into the online space, it's just another place. It shouldn't be seen as something separate. It's another place for people to experience our brand. And that might then trigger them to go and try the product, which is part of the brand. And then, make it as seamless as possible to then order online. This is all part of building the brand.
Well, we've talked a lot. Like, my take on it, because I think this is something that people get wrong about marketers. They think that marketers are like flashy and we're out in the world and we're doing things. And we're like, actually, most good marketers are sitting around spreadsheets all day long. Like, you're looking at the most boring numbers that anybody could look at. And one of the things that I've really come to feel in the years of that, translating into digital spaces and lots of metrics, is that metrics, if done right, can actually bring people who are far from us and make them feel so much more human. Like, you can learn to read data in a way that helps you understand what are their motivations and where are they coming from and who do they trust. And I bring this up because I know, like, one through line with everything that I've read, that, you've written, everything that you've said, is this sense of belonging. And I don't know that there's ever been a time that at least myself and my friends all feel, you feel like you need a community, you need a sense of belonging, you need the safe place to land, whatever it might be. So how, first, how do you deal with that in a time when the world feels very divisive and fragmented? And second, how do you know how to lean into belonging or cultural relevance just enough without feeling like it's token or performative, or maybe somebody on the team got the inferences wrong? Like, how do you do it safely?
Okay, and this is for me kind of the heartland. So you really do your research very well, I have to say. It's so interesting. Not 2 nights ago, it was the night before the first day of school for my kids. I had to go to the hospital for kidney stones. So,
we're grown-ups.
Grown-ups, yeah, exactly. Too much, not enough water, apparently. So, last night I was sitting with my 13-year-old, and we were chatting about the school day, and he was worried about me. It was a tough day at school, first day at school. We've only been in the UK for a year now, and we were in Sweden for 6 years before that, and sort of they started their lives in South Africa. And he was saying to me, Dad, this feeling of belonging, like, where will I ever belong? So, and he's 13, and, there's a lot that comes with being a teenager around, like, where do I belong? Who am I? But I think it is a lifelong truth in a world that, as you say, is fragmented and polarized, and we're all over there's diasporas or different kinds of diasporas. And, but it sort of hits me very deeply, because I sort of try to answer that question for him. And the only way that I can answer your question is to think about this on a personal level and then apply it to brands, which is, I grew up with a family who were part of the Lebanese diaspora. They had come from Lebanon to South Africa. And, like immigrants, after the Second World War, they all kind of work really hard and want to pay their taxes on time and make sure they're contributing to community. They want to be seen as valuable, contributing members of society. There's something about us being, all of us as humans, wanting to be valuable members of society so that we feel like we can belong and that we earn our place. But the thing that they did more than that, and particularly my folks, was that they had the doors open in our house. So in order to belong, you sometimes want to be welcomed. They just sort of flipped it and they said, everybody's welcome. And at Christmas time, we'd have the family, we'd have the friends, and then if there was anybody who was single or didn't have a place to go for Christmas, I see you nodding your head. You probably
expat, lived that life.
Come and don't feel like you're on your own. Like my mom said, I can't imagine someone being on their own at Christmas time. So you take that sort of learning of, in order to belong, we need to allow others to feel like they belong with us. And I think that's the thing, that's the role that brands can play, particularly in the hospitality industries. So, alcohol, it's sort of a hospitable place. In the media space, actually, it's an important role for public service, is that you should have a place where there's a common moment, whether it's the coronation of the king or, gathering around planet Earth with David Attenborough, or the news at 6, or the Euros with England in the finals, and these are moments. They're really important moments for people to feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves, because there's the opportunity afterwards to gather around the water cooler or the tea station, and have a chat, and you've got something in common.
And we do that across all channels. Like, that's not just TV. That's TikTok and YouTube, and that's pervasive.
But one of the challenges in a programmatic algorithmic world is that everybody's on their own device, in their own room, having consumed something on their own. Imagine you get invited to somebody's house or a function, and everybody goes to their own room with a bottle of their own wine, and they're kind of sipping on that wine, and then they come out and they're like, "How was the wine?" "Well, my Chardonnay was good. Your Pinot Noir." The thing is, the experience needs to be shared, and that's when you feel like you belong, because you've had an evening together. You've had a moment that's memorable. You've had an experience that's memorable, and this idea of everybody being welcome, whether it's a niche target audience or, in our case, a universal audience, it's a responsibility, I think, that brands need to play. I think if you use it purely to say together we're great, which I've seen a lot of, it starts to feel twee, because it's seen as a form of manipulation. But if it's part of the DNA of a brand, if it's authentically baked into the brand in a way that's true to that brand. So each brand might be different. The one might be, "You're welcome in my kitchen, and come and taste the recipe, the recipes that we create." The other one might be like, "The best parties are at this hotel," and whatever it is that's the truth to that product or that brand. But there's an element of you being welcome and you belonging to either a niche tribe or a bigger tribe or a national tribe. In our case, I use tribe loosely.
I mean, so I'll just say about this. I, after many years of being an expat, so I left the States when I was 23, 24, ended up around the world in a place that I literally knew nobody. And it was really hard to, like, I had been raised in a way that you don't really ask for help. And, I had all of this culture that I brought with me as an American to New Zealand. And I remember that first Christmas. We did 3 different Christmas that year because everybody was so afraid that we were going to be alone for Christmas. And I learned that I had to open up. I had to ask for help. I mean, I remember getting screwed on purchases because I had no idea that I was in a country where I was supposed to haggle. So I realized I need to talk to people about how does money work in this country and how do you get things done. Anyway, where all this is going is that I became incredibly empathetic. And I also, I have a rule in my house that I don't care if I don't even like you. If you come to me and ask for help, I will help, because it takes so much bravery, right, to go out into the world and to say to somebody, "I don't know how to do this and I need some help, and can you please help me?" And I feel like that empathy and that understanding of, no matter how well off you look, life is hard for all of us, has been so vital to the work that I do as a marketer, and trying to understand and see why somebody chooses to engage with any brand. But the other part of that, and just to tag on to the hospitality part and the DNA, you can only fake that shit for so long. If you think that, and it lives in every decision that doesn't just belong with marketing, from my perspective, it lives in return policies. It lives in how promotions run. It lives in customer service, that sense of what the relationship that you want to have with your customer is absolutely pervasive and is often top down.
I think you've hit sort of, for me, this is a very rich vein, because people talk about the lifetime value of customers, And if you stop there and you say the lifetime value of the customer to me, I think it's dangerous, because then you're looking at exploiting that customer and they're eventually going to get tired of you. But if you think of lifetime value as sort of a two-way relationship, I need to offer a lifetime of value in order for them to want to have a lifetime with me. Then you start thinking about why brands were built. Like the really good business people that you learn from are always talking about that, which is that they've built something to add value in the lives of their consumer. And that's why there's a relationship that you build. That's why that consumer feels like they're part of something bigger than themselves. That's why there's an ongoing conversation. And also, you hear a lot in sort of industry talk, community management or community engagement, as if that's a tool that of course you can use tools.
It's talking to people on social media.
It's actually exactly, but it's, it's community is building a sense of belonging, and community has value for the individual, the consumer, the audience, but it also has value for the business. And I think that second part is important for business leaders to hear. This is not just about altruism for the sake of being nice. This is business value. If you build a community of people who really want to be part of something and you welcoming them in and creating a sense of belonging, it's good for business. It's good for business. With Absolut, which was the role I had before this one, when we were thinking about the DNA of the brand, that brand was built on the idea of the outsider being belonging. Whether it was, if you go back to the sort of 1980s, if you're part of the gay community in New York in the 1980s, you were seen as the outsider. It's not the LGBT movement of today. It's not pinkwashing. It's a real Absolut went and worked with the gay community in New York in the 1980s. The
herring bottles, I remember that. Yeah,
Before carrying it was the Warrell bottle, and that community and that engagement had led to kind of 50 years of success for the brand, because it really baked itself into culture. And here's the upshot, which is when I include the outsider, whether they're gay or straight, whether they're the banker or the farmer, whether they're black or white, whether they're girl or boy, and you bring them together, the party's always going to be a lot more fun. That's the upshot of inclusivity there. So Studio, 54 in New York was an eclectic place of like crazy fun, because it was open to everybody. And, it's a lot more fun than a line dance somewhere else. It's just, everybody looking the same. So that's one example of why belonging and inclusivity is important, because there's an upside to that. There's two sides of that. It could be a small community in a small place that everybody knows one another. There's a sense of belonging there, but there's also for the outsider being invited in. There's a different kind of belonging. It's a belonging to a new tribe, a new set of friends, a new community, and brands can do that. They can offer that space for people to feel like they belong. And when they do, then that value exchange becomes that much more meaningful. And to your point, it has to be authentic.
Well, it was interesting when I first started working in wine. I was in this mastermind group for marketers, and I remember going out, like at the time, and this was 10 years ago. This is before we were having a lot of inclusivity and wine discussions. And we had the research out of several universities in the States that showed, in their own words, the lack of representation of Latino and Black communities in the wine industry in America. So I posited a question to the mastermind group, and I said, well, as a marketer, what is my job? I am the person who sets what it looks like, what it sounds like, where we're going, who we're talking to. What is my responsibility to do this? To inform my brands of the need for representation. And the response overwhelmingly is, your responsibility is to do what the brand pays you to do. And I summarily left the mastermind group and made a policy for our clients that if I had the data that showed that you needed to be more inclusive and you refused to do it, I fired you as a client on the spot. Like, it was just sort of flat out. I was able to do that. I realized that that was, a privileged position that I could be like, I'm going to fire a client and fuck you all kind of thing. But I wonder about these brands. Like, if you look at someone like the BBC or what you were doing at Absolut, as a brand and as a marketer, is it the responsibility to show what culture, to reflect culture as it is right now, or to reflect what we believe it can be?
My tendency is to say the latter, what it can be. But I do think it's sort of that beautiful Venn diagram of what is the DNA of the brand. Like, what is the brand? Like, you might have a brand that's quite niche, and that niche brand might have value for a particular audience. So that's okay. It depends on it depends on the ambition of that brand in terms of how broad it wants to go. But it may, that brand, that's its DNA. And then the second part of the Venn diagram is, of course, the consumer or the audience. And depending on how wide that audience group is, and typically with scale brands, with big brands, you're trying to go after a big audience. And particularly, we come back to that beautiful group of Gen Z and now soon Gen Alpha. What's important to them? For them, diversity and inclusivity is incredibly important. It's one of the values, beyond sustainability and the environment. I mean, it's probably one of the most important.
It's one of the number one, in research that they're seeking for.
So if you're going after that audience, and if your brand has the DNA that suggests the same, then there's a match already in terms of values. Then of course you're going to want to represent culture in a way, and that's the sort of third part of the Venn diagram. You want to represent culture where it's heading to. It's not a lofty kind of false pretense of the future. It's more this is where your values are aligned with the brand's values, and this is where it can go if you focus on those values. I think that's the way to think about it, and that's why I say that I think it's horses for courses. I think it depends on what brand you're building. For me, I've always been attracted to brands that are about belonging and about the outsider being brought in. And Castle Lager was about bringing people together. Absolut was about bringing the outsider in. The BBC is about universal value for all. So that's kind of my own personal journey has always been. Fortunately, like you can't design these things 20 years in advance, but as things evolve, you sort of make choices that take you on a certain route, and I think that's all. It's all about choices. But absolutely, if you're going, if any brand is thinking of winning younger audiences, this is important to them. It doesn't matter what people in presidents' roles might be thinking. That's a different group. That's okay.
All I can say is, I hope so. I think that we're living in a moment that even when you and I sit here and we talk about niche and inclusivity and representation and community, it feels like such a trying time to even have some of those conversations when we're looking at siloing and but on to a positive note. I'm not going to let that slow us down. I want to close with one question. I know that you have described yourself in interviews past as both a storyteller on one hand and a strategist on the other. Is one harder than the other these days?
No, I don't think so. I think they're both hard, but they're both very fulfilling. And I think the two together become. It's this idea of the left brain and the right brain. Actually, if you sort of break it down to something very simple, which is you need the data and the information to be able to make good business decisions with the left brain. You need to be able to, Norman, who sort of gave me the hunter farmer analogy. Also used to say something else.
Yeah.
The cigarette guy is such a lovely human being. He used to say, make reality your friend. So when you're thinking about strategy and you're thinking about the world, you got to be realistic. What is the reality of my market? What's the reality of my consumer? Strategy helps you sort of lay out how am I going to navigate the way to play and how to win. So strategy, left brain, and then right brain becomes so important because strategy is worth the paper that it's written on unless it comes into action. And to get an organization, to get a brand moving and to get passion and to have that sort of connecting emotionally with human beings, our audiences, our consumers, that needs right brain creativity. It needs stories. It needs stories that are compelling and that are meaningful and that are real and authentic. And that's what gets an organization moving.
Whose stories, though? Whose stories?
So the story has to be the story of your brand, whichever brand it is. There's only one story, and it's the story of the brand. And if you can find ways of, like as you and I have done, of connecting with that story, it makes it very personal. But it's the story of the brand. So, and the story of the brand reflected through the stories of the audience or the consumer. And so the strategy says kind of, how does the brand story and the consumer story match? And then those are the stories we tell, because that beautiful little.
But you got to have both of them. The story without the strategy, not going to work. The strategy without the story, going to fall flat.
It comes back to the thing you started with, like if your marketing is BS and it's not connected to the product, then what's the point? Yeah. And if the product is beautiful but nobody knows about it, then what's the point? But both are really important for business.
Charl, thank you so much for your time. Just an absolute delight. Come on anytime. Next time we'll do this in person from London or Barcelona. But I feel like
I choose Barcelona.
You choose Barcelona. All right. We'll have a party. Community building.